So King the Humming Swordsman Brook has been singing shanties and asking to see panties ever since he first made his unexpected appearance in One Piece. From the very beginning, we could tell that Brook was going to be a hilarious new comedic relief character. But what we didn't know was just how complex and interesting of a character arc Oda had planned for the musical talking skeleton. Brook's existence has been filled with some of life's highest highs and lowest lows. If you make it to the very end of this week's deep dive, I promise I will prove how Brook is one of the best written characters in One Piece, one of its most underrated swordsmen, and how he is one of the most useful Straw Hats in terms of helping Luffy reach his dream. To fully understand the depth of Brook's character, we have to start 90 years prior to the current storyline, in an unknown kingdom somewhere in the West Blue, which is where Brook was born. Now, we don't know too much about what Brook was doing in his youth, but we do know that whatever it was led him to joining his kingdom's battle force, and that he was skilled enough to rise all the way in the ranks to being the leader of a battle convoy. This military-esque training is where Brook would develop his fencing sword style and many of his named attacks. Brook's time as a soldier is an underappreciated fact of his character, as he has more fighting experience, leadership experience, and has probably even taken more lives than any of the other Straw Hats. And I'll explain why that is so important later in the video. An unknown amount of time goes by, and then at some point Brook would leave his kingdom and join a West Blue pirate crew called the Rumbar Pirates, led by Captain Yorkie. This was a very unique pirate crew because every member was a musician. The Rumbar Pirates' entire philosophy revolved around spreading joy through their mutual love of music, and as a talented multi-instrumentalist, Brook fit right in. An insane fact about the Rumbar Pirates is that they actually predate the golden age of piracy, meaning that they were pirating purely for the love of the game and not because of the draw of the One Piece legend, like most modern pirates post Goldie Roger's execution. But they were active some 20 years or so while Roger was a rookie pirate. This is why I am positive that Brook's age and ties to these lore-heavy periods in One Piece history will 100% be important in the future of this story. I believe that Oda has some big plans for a Brook lore dump. So after Brook joined the Rumbar Pirates, they would go on to adventure all over the West Blue, just living their best life. Like, they seem like the most fun pirate crew to be a part of. And then one day, about 52 years prior to the beginning of the current One Piece storyline, the crew noticed that they were being followed by a baby whale that had gotten lost from his family. Brook could tell that the whale was really sad, so he suggested to his captain that they should play some music to cheer him up. And so the crew played him a beautiful song, and it worked like a charm. Once the day had ended, the crew assumed the baby whale had left, but when they woke up, they were surprised he was still following them. Since he seemed to love music as much as they did, the crew kept playing it for him. Then they started to feed him and eventually allowed him to accompany them on adventures. It was soon revealed that Brook had named the whale Laboon, and so now he was basically a full-blown member of the Rumbar Pirates. And if you're thinking, man, this guy's focusing a lot on the Laboon part of this story, well, that's because I am. One, because I think it's very important to the context of Brook's character, and two, I just love Laboon. I even have a stuffed Laboon in real life, so don't judge me. Laboon kept it so real that he would even help out during battles. An example is like when one time the Rumbar Pirates were fighting a particularly fierce enemy group of pirates, and several of their crew members fell into the sea, none of which could be saved until Laboon rescued them. As their adventures continued, the crew noticed that Laboon had taken a particular liking to Brook. They believed it was because Brook's afro made him look like a whale. I don't know if this is true or not, but I do love how much emphasis afros get in One Piece. Oda just loves them. Anyway, so Laboon traveled with them a little while longer, but eventually Captain Yorkie decided it was time for the Rumbar Pirates to enter the Grand Line and take their adventure to to the next level, but they had a dilemma. The crew knew that the harsh waters and terrifying monsters of the Grand Line made it far too dangerous of a place for a young whale like Laboon. So they attempted to convince him to stay behind in the West Blue, but they failed. So they made Brook ask Laboon personally since he was the closest to him, but he failed as well. After this, Captain Yorkie came up with a cruel but necessary plan. He ordered the crew to ignore Laboon no matter what. Basically just pretend he doesn't exist, hoping he would get discouraged and then leave them, but in return be safer. This time their plan seemingly worked, and for a while they never saw him. However, right as they entered the Grand Line, they stopped at the Twin Cape Lighthouse that guides ships coming down from Reverse Mountain into the Grand Line. And during their stop, the lighthouse's overseer, Crocus, pointed out that it seemed like a baby whale was following them and asked if he was their pet. This revelation shocked them, but they was happy to see Laboon again. So they decided to stay in the area for a while, hang out with Laboon, repair the ship, and gather supplies. After 3 months, they knew it was time to move on, but before they left, they made an arrangement with Crocus to take care of Laboon while they was gone, and they promised Laboon that they would return to him within a few years after they sailed all the way around the Grand Line. And so, with a heartfelt goodbye, the Runbar pirates set sail into the Grand Line with dreams of grandeur and excitement in their hearts that one day they would reunite with their friend. However, sadly, this day would never come because Brook and the Runbar pirates would soon experience what only can be described as a series of truly unfortunate events. But before we discuss just what went wrong on their dream adventure, if you would like to help me chase my own dreams of becoming the Pirate King of YouTube, just like this video and subscribe. The like goal for this video will be 178. At first, the Runbar pirates managed to do well for themselves in the Grand Line, traveling far into it despite their cruel seas and unpredictable weather. This in itself is respectable. Even with some of these hardships, the crew always made time for a good time, eating, drinking, and playing amazing music, as well as reminiscing about Laboon. And then one day, disaster struck. The crew discovered a random Grand Line forest and decided to go exploring in it. However, after they exited the forest, Captain Yorkie, as well as several other members of the crew, realized that somehow they had contracted a disease. It wasn't long before they deducted it was likely incurable, fatal, and contagious, a devastating trifecta. This led to Captain Yorkie making another hard but necessary decision. In order to prevent the disease from spreading, Yorkie decided that himself and the rest of the infected crew would take the Runbar ship and try to escape the Grand Line through the Calm Belt, in hopes they could find treatment somewhere. But he knew they would likely die. As Yorkie laid on his deathbed, he asked Brook for one last favor, to send him and the affected off to his favorite song, Bink's Saki. And with that, Brook and the remaining Runbar pirates split from their friends who were sure to perish. After this, the crew appointed Brook as the new captain and continued sailing into the Grand Line. Thanks to Brook's extraordinary leadership, despite losing half of their crew, the remnants of the Runbar pirates kinda crushed things for a while. Brook even earned himself a respectable bounty, so keep that in mind whenever you think about Brook from now on. He was a successful soldier and military leader, as well as an impressive pirate captain. But yeah, so as of now, things are going relatively smooth for the crew. They were even getting back to their joyful nature, but then they would unknowingly sail into the mysterious waters of the Florian Triangle. The Florian Triangle is a stretch of the sea in the Grand Line that is notorious for the many ships that go missing in it for a plethora of reasons. The Florian Triangle is somewhat based on the real-life Bermuda Triangle that has similar eerie legends surrounding it. Almost immediately after entering the area, the Runbar pirates got lost and then were ambushed by enemy pirates. But Brook and some of his crewmates were able to survive the brutal attack, though be it barely. However, continuing their bad luck, the surviving members soon started to realize their despicable enemies had tainted their weapons with deadly poison. Among pirates, poison poison is one of the most unhonorable ways of fighting. Remember how lowly everyone thought of Don Krieg whenever he threatened to use poison attacks back in the Barate arc? There just isn't any heart or skill in its use. Like, it's just not fair that even though the Rumbar pirates fought hard and won the battle, they would still likely lose their lives. And to make things worse, their crew's doctor had been killed in the original attack. I mean, good God, this crew has had so much bad luck. I feel that someone in it must have stepped on a crack, broke a mirror, screwed over a curse casting witch, and passed a parade of black cats on the same day. And so now without a doctor, so no one can even attempt to try to treat them, and based on their symptoms, the entire crew knew they were slowly dying. The crew was aware that Brook had eaten the revived devil fruit. Therefore, he would be the sole member to return back to life after they passed away. Because of this, Brook suggested to his crew that they should play one last song that would be recorded on a tone dial that they had bought from a merchant. Brook promised his dying crew that if he did return from death, he would take the dial to Laboon and use it to play the Rumbar Pirates' last song for him. The crew was ecstatic with his idea, and so the Rumbar Pirates mustered up the little strength they had, started singing their favorite song for the last time, the iconic Binks Saki. They made sure their last performance was as beautiful and joy-filled as the days when the whole crew was adventuring and living the high life. Toward the end of their performance, one by one, the crew slowly succumbed to their poison and died with smiles on their face. The way that Oda depicted their last moment was the most beautiful but sad scene I have ever witnessed in fiction. I actually shed tears just reconsuming it for this video. How it happened was, when there was only 4 of Brook's friends left performing, he says, "Where is everyone?" This has turned into a quartet. And then the 4th one dies and he says, "A trio." And then his 3rd to last friend dies and he sadly musters out a duet. And when the 2nd to last dies, with tears running down his face, he says a solo, finishes the song, and passes away himself. You're a cold person if this didn't break you. All of this is why I think Brook's backstory might be the saddest out of all the One Piece characters. But let me know in the comments who you think has the saddest backstory in One Piece. So what we just covered was Brook's first life up until his death. After this, even though Brook did have some doubts, his soul did return to the mortal world thanks to the powers of the Yami Yami no Mi. However, unfortunately for Brook, this story is written by Eiichiro Oda. So before his character arc gets more pleasant for him, he will have to suffer just a little bit more trauma first. Basically, because Brook died in the Florian Triangle, the intense fog made it impossible for his soul to locate its body for an entire year. And by the time the body was found, it was just a pile of bones, with the only surviving non-skeleton part being his mighty afro, which remained perfectly intact. Apparently because its roots run deep or something like that, but what did I tell you? Afros are overpowered in One Piece. Next, we will be diving deep into what Brook has done with his second chance at life. So stick around for that right after today's sponsor, Global Comics, the best free digital manga reading and distribution platform on the internet. Global Comics has thousands of mangas, graphic novels, and webcomics from around the world. Their library is filled with every type of series you can imagine. Action, horror, comedy series, ecchi series, you name it, they have it. From the most massively popular series to the deepest cuts. And if you are an aspiring comic creator yourself, Global Comics is dedicated to empowering creators with the tools you need to put your hard work in front of new audiences and, importantly, monetize it. As a person who analyzes manga for both a hobby and a job, I was personally blown away by their app's interface. It has a pleasing aesthetic and is just so easy to use. Plus, its panel-to-panel reading setting makes reading manga even more engaging. So check out the link in the video description to sign up and also receive 33% off a 1-year subscription. So when Brook eventually raises from the dead, he finds himself surrounded by the skeletal remains of all of his dead crewmates. He decides to gather them all up and store them in coffins located deep within the ship. Now, we all know that Brook is no stranger to suffering, But to me, this next chapter in the book of Brook's life would truly be hell. The first problem that Brook encountered was that his ship's rudder had been broken in that previous battle, and so for the next few decades, Brook couldn't steer the ship. He was forced to be a slave of the ocean currents and just float around aimlessly through the fog. Isolation is one of the worst forms of torture imaginable. Brook would spend his endless free time rolling around on the deck, jumping around, and practicing his 45-degree lean. Even though he tried his best to keep his spirits up, yo-ho-ho, at times things got really dark for him. So in a super understandable way, I think it's fair to say that Brook suffered a psychological break from the combination of back-to-back traumatic events and extended isolation. Often Brook would either pretend his friends were still alive, and then there was other times where he would straight up hallucinate he was in a reality where his friends were still with him and that the reality where they all died was the one that was a dream, only to eventually realize he was still all alone. You can tell all of this gave Brook some form of PTSD and or depression, with there being several times in Thriller Bark where Brook made it clear that he has had thoughts about unaliving himself, and really the only reason that he didn't go through with it is because he thinks that would be unfair to Laboon, since he already feels tormented by the fact that his entire crew broke their promise to return to him, and being the sole survivor, he carries that weight on his shoulders. Brook would endure 50 years of this mind-shattering loneliness, and then around 5 years prior to when the current storyline begins, Brook's ship drifted to Thriller Bark, a island-sized ship and home to the then warlord Gecko Moria and his subordinates. Brook decided to explore the place in hopes of finding parts that he could use to fix his ship's broken rudder, but all he found was various strange creatures that inhabited the spooky island. And then to make things worse, he was captured and had his shadow stolen by Moria's shadow manipulation devil fruit powers, which is extra bad because in One Piece, shadows act almost like second souls, so they are really important. Souls in One Piece is a complicated topic, so just for context of this video, know that when someone gets their shadow stolen in One Piece, the person's body can't come in contact with sunlight or it will be vaporized. They also don't have a reflection in mirrors, and the separated shadow can be placed in other bodies, even retaining its owner's personality and skill set. Brook's capturers would technically then set him free by setting him adrift on his ship, but Brook knew without his shadow, he would never be able to live a normal life. So he retraced his path back to Thriller Bark and spied on the zombies, learning their weaknesses. He first thought it was fish, but later he learned from Hogback that it was actually the salt on the fish. By the way, all the info Brook was able to gather would tremendously help the Straw Hats later in the arc. Brook interrogated Hogback for info on where his zombie counterpart was. After finding said zombie, Brook attempted to defeat him in battle to regain his body, but the zombie proved to be too strong since the zombie's body was that of the legendary swordsman Ryuma, also known as the Sword God. After Brook received several severe blows to the skull, which left him with his iconic head crack, he realized with his current strength he couldn't win, so he asked for mercy and then quickly left Thriller Bark. Remember, Brook is ridiculously resilient, so he would spend the next 5 years training himself in order to defeat Ryuma the next time they met. But before that day would come, Brook's ship would cross paths with the Straw Hats, leading to one of my favorite character introductions in the series. Oda does such a good job at hitting us with how great Brook's chemistry is with the crew right from the jump, with each Straw Hat having unique reactions to Brook's appearance and personality. We also get to see how Brook's complex personality can swing between being a perfect gentleman and then more pervy than Sanji, how he can be the best comedic relief character, but then he can also be serious at times. Dead serious. Get it? Because he's a skeleton? Yo! The whole entire big dinner scene was filled with so many hilarious and emotional moments. This is where the Straw Hats learn a little about Brook's backstory and how he got his shadow stolen, which ended up leading to the events of Thriller Bark and eventually Brook joining the Straw Hats. Even though Brook told the Straw Hats to leave the island because it's too dangerous and he wouldn't want such nice people getting hurt because of him. But to be fair, Brook didn't know yet that dangling a venture in front of Luffy was like, well, dangling meat in front of Luffy. me. It was important to dive deep into Brook's lives up until he meets/joins the Straw Hats, because I feel given everything that Brook has been through, it explains why he has such a deep appreciation and devotion to his new friends. This can be kind of subtle, but whenever you do start noticing it, you realize that Brook works hard to do whatever it takes for his crewmates to survive and achieve whatever goal they may have. So I think it's time for Brook to get a little love and appreciation himself. Therefore, the last part of this video will be for the real Brook fans. A full-on Brook glaze-a-thon of my favorite Brook moments. And make sure to let us know your favorite Brook moments in the comments. Brook appears in Thriller Bark. Frankie and Robin had been overpowered and captured by the General Zombie Tararan, a gigantic undead spider thing, and just when it looked like all hope was lost for them, we hear this beautiful but haunting humming and singing coming from the distance. And boom, Brook appears with such a cool aura. It is the first time we get to see how serious Brook can be whenever the time calls for it, and what his sword style is, which is this smooth but aggressive fencing style that's hard to explain. Brook calmly chats with Frankie, who warns him about the spider's strength, and Brook is just like, don't worry, the battle's almost over, and is placing his sword back in its sheath, and then the spider is just split down the middle. I freaking love this move by Brook every time he does it. I don't know how he pulls it off, but it's almost like he freezes time, or it's just like he's too fast. It is revealed that Brook completely destroyed and purified Tararan in one single move, which makes Tararan's subordinates realize that Brook is the Humming Swordsman who caused a lot of chaos on Thriller Bark 5 years ago. There are two other Brook moments I really liked in Thriller Bark. The first is Brook and Zoro's scene at the gravesite where Brook buried his friends. When the time calls for it, Zoro can be one of the most mature Straw Hats. Alongside Robin and Brook himself, they are the most mentally able to deal with things like death and other real world adult stuff. I just found the way that Brook and Zoro bonded here kinda wholesome. After all, Brook did witness the origins of the nothing happened moment, so he has like a respect for Zoro's character and even allowed Zoro to mourn with him. The next one is when Brook was told that Laboon was still waiting on him, Brook officially asking to join the Straw Hats and him admitting he was glad he was alive, all in the same scene. And then he got to play his music for people again for the first time in decades. This scene also gave us one of my favorite panels in the manga. Luffy laying on the piano while Brook is playing, it just looks so awesome. Brook versus Zio, a super underrated feat from Brook. He finishes a decently powerful fishman off rather easily, using that humming, walking past the feet thing he does again. But post time skip, the aura is so cold, things around him start freezing, including his attacks, which now do ice damage. Basically, Brook has ice powers now because something to do with soul powers in the underworld. Speaking of the time skip, another badass Brook moment is whenever we learn that Brook became a rock star during the 2 years he was separated from the Straw Hats. Like he has a manager and diehard fans that literally riot whenever he says this is his last concert. I love this for Brook because it's an example of how Brook is extraordinarily talented and competent at everything he sets his mind to. Joins the military, rises to leader, joins a pirate crew, becomes a captain by election. Through his pure talent, goes from playing music trapped in a cage to being a superstar. And then when it's time for him to rejoin the Straw Hats, he plays his humble role and doesn't try to outshine anyone. Brook sees himself as the old man who's already lived a full life once, and this time around he wants to make sure his new friends get to live their life the best they can. Oh, and another reason I love Rockstar Brook is it gave us the best wanted poster in all of One Piece. One of the few I had to buy full size. Okay, Brook being awesomely helpful flash round. He retrieved Zoro's swords at Fishman Island. He scared off the Oni Wabanasu on Wano and saved Robin from Black Maria with his cold souled parade attack. And also he completely destroyed Black Maria's subordinates in a single attack. Oh yeah, he also freed Sanji and sliced up Big Mom's main homies twice. Once to save Nami with the help of Frankie, and once whenever she was attacking the Thousand Sunny. Brook's Wano contributions are super underrated, but speaking speaking of Big Mom though, if we are glazing Brook, we of course have to mention that Soul King, the Humming Swordsman Brook, was 100% the undisputed MVP of the Whole Cake Island arc. Big Mom's soul powers are one of the many things that make her particularly difficult to deal with, and one of the many things she can do with them is seemingly make endless servants called homies from pieces of her and other souls. They can and often do overwhelm Big Mom's opponents, but luckily for the Straw Hats, they had Brook, who reminded everyone there why they call him the Soul King, taking out dozens of her homies with his soulful guitar riffs. And then Brook switched to his sword and took out all the Big Mom pirates that was there as well, rather easily I may say. Because Zoro is on the crew, I feel some people overlook how cold Brook is with a blade. Brook doesn't have overwhelming physical strength like Zoro, so he uses technical skill and speed to dominate his opponents instead. By the time Brook is finished here, there were bodies littered all around him. One of the most impressive things Brook did on Whole Cake was finesse a copy of Big Mom's poneglyph. Thanks to Brook, the Straw Hats didn't just save Sanji, which was their ultimate goal, but they stole a poneglyph rubbing from an Emperor of the Sea, which is a massive deal in the pirate world. That's like kind of what all the emperors are fighting over. This accolade was one of the things that Big News Morgan used to justify calling Luffy a 5th Emperor contender, which helped further the reputation of all the Straw Hats. As a matter of fact, the entire Straw Hat Fire Tank Alliance's plan relied on smashing a picture of Mother Caramel, which would ruin the wedding and hopefully incapacitate Big Mom. And although things didn't go exactly as planned, it was of course the MVP Brook who was the one to crush the picture with a hammer. Again, Brook's actions are directly furthering Luffy's ambitions of becoming the undisputed pirate king. Brook's incredible resolve to help his friends accomplish their dreams was put on full display in what might be my favorite Brook moments. His speech and overall conversations whenever he was face to face with the Yonko Big Mom. There were many iconic lines here, but here are my favorites. Brook explaining to Big Mom his faith in both Sanji and Luffy's true nature and ability to settle their differences, and that in case Sanji's resolve wins and he stays on Whole Cake Island, that this is why Brook is risking his own life stealing Big Mom's poneglyph. That way Sanji wouldn't be riddled with guilt that the Straw Hats risked their lives for nothing other than him, but that instead they achieved something essential towards Luffy's dream while there, which is just so big picture. Then this leads to Big Mom asking if Brook ever considered that they all might die, in which Brook hits her with, quote,
死ぬことを計画に入れるバカがどこにいますか、お嬢さん。
Let's go. Brook calling Big Mom young lady will always be the best thing ever because it's so true. Brook was already pirating while Big Mom was still Little Mom wearing diapers. Brook is one of the best written, developed, and fashionable characters in all of One Piece. So thank you, Oda, for such a cool character, and thank all of you for making it to the very end of this video. Comment bone below so I know you're one of the realest that made it. The word or any bone or skull emojis.